I think the Black church does a poor job at doing the other stuff you're supposed to be doing for the community. For example, in my opinion, there's too many churches, right? When I walk down Tremont, I could pass 10, 15 churches on a 15-minute walk, right? Mm-hmm. It makes no sense to me. I think all these churches are a sign of ego. People want to be the king of their own castles. They don't want to be under the leadership of other people. But all you're doing is dividing your congregations, and most of these churches can't afford their rent anymore. And so that's why you're also seeing like a rise in all these churches getting foreclosed and having to sell their property. And so you have that, because there are too many churches, you divide a congregation, you divide the resources. I believe it is better if we had less churches, larger congregations. I'm not saying a super mega church, but this should be like 100-member standard, right? You need to have at least 100 members. This way, you have enough money to support your building and your various church activities, but also doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. Being a Christian is not about going to church on Sundays to see other Christians. You're supposed to be out there doing stuff for the world, like being the salt of the earth. I don't think churches today do the world stuff like they're supposed to be doing. All our churches, like we said earlier, 50 years ago were doing. Like, Black churches were very active in the social and political lives of African Americans. I don't think that's the case today. Do you agree, disagree? What do you think?
I agree. I agree to a certain extent. Okay. That a lot of churches are not very active in community involvement. Of course, back in the civil rights movement and things, they were very much active in that movement. That's how it got rolling. When you talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, churches were some of the staging grounds. That was some of the meeting places where they planned things and stuff. I see some people blame the church, or they'll blame certain ministries, because let me say this: every ministry has a different role or job to play. Okay, in the church, every ministry possibly cannot be a community meeting place or whatever. I'm not against supporting that or supporting a church that does that. Okay, because whereas I have a small church, maybe we don't have the resources to do the big community projects, but we can join with another church. It doesn't take away from you being your church. You can join with another church to support them with the community efforts. Okay, like for instance, and I'll give a simple example. And I hate to use this as an example because people need to eat more than Thanksgiving. But a lot of people will do a Thanksgiving dinner, for the homeless or whatever, for the community. My church is small. We really can't get that going. We maybe feed about 50 people, maybe, if we can, get together. But maybe somebody else is doing something. So we can go and help them and make a big effort, rent up, maybe get a school auditorium or something like that and come together. Again, ego, who's going to be in charge? Whose name is going to be on,
Yeah.
So that becomes the issue. Space. Some churches, the church I play for, they have a soup kitchen. Some churches don't have room for a soup kitchen. They wouldn't be able to do that. They only have a sanctuary, with maybe a small bathroom, whatever. I kind of understand why there are a lot of different churches. Again, going back to when we started out talking about difference in doctrinal beliefs,
yes,
or doctrinal issues. Sometimes people come across some information or some knowledge, or their own, conjure up their own beliefs, and they don't believe that anymore. So they want to, start another church. Or there's some infighting, maybe something that the pastor did and the people don't like it, whatever.
But that many churches, though, there are a lot of churches, man. We live around the same area. There are a lot of churches.
Well, I don't live there no more now. I moved. I'm not going down the Bronx, but
Moving
I
on
moved.
up.
Yeah. Thank God. Yes,
Moving
Lord.
on up.
I couldn't wait to get out of that. I mean, it just was getting terrible. That's a whole other podcast within
Yeah.
itself. That's a whole other podcast within
But you
itself.
remember though, you remember how it was around
Yes,
here.
of course, yeah.
And
I
so
still
I
come
don't
over here, man.
understand how there's that many
It's
doctrines.
worse in Brooklyn.
I know Brooklyn is the worst.
Yeah, I mean, churches next door to each other, literally.
Which, once again, I don't understand how you can just divide yourself by that. Like, there comes a certain point where if you have an issue with being under the leadership of somebody else, that is kind of a problem that you have to work out. You have to work out. Why do this thing where, and the craziest ones is where it's like someone within the church that leaves and then also wants to pull like the members from the church. Like, what are you doing?
Well, you know what? You're a very honest person. I've been listening to you from the beginning. I have listened to every Kingdom podcast. I'm catching up with this one, so I'm going to do the same, and I'm going to be very honest because that's the only way to get delivered or be free is through honesty. I left my father's church.
Okay.
I didn't. Now, here's the thing about it. I did not leave my father's church to start a church. It was 4 years had gone by from the time that I left my father's church and I started my own church. But some things happened. And of course, it involved my father. If it didn't involve him, then there was no need to leave, because I think that as long as it's not a leadership thing, then if you have an issue with your coworker, are you leaving the job because you don't like your coworker?
No.
Pretty much more so if something's wrong with the boss or whatever, then that would give you more of an opportunity. That's why I left my job. The supervisor or the director, it just wasn't happening, and you're not going to use me. So I said, you know what? I'm leaving. And so I left my father's church in 2008 over an issue. And then when I went to start my church in 2012, I wasn't pulling anybody from my father's church.
They followed you.
Well, no. Nobody left the church and came to my church. I actually had a few people that called me and said that they were coming, and I told them, no, you stay right there. I let one come, which was one of my cousins. I let her come because she said she wasn't going back no more. So, I mean, it's like either you don't go or you know. So she said she wasn't going back. I'm not going back there. So I said, well, you come on since I'm your cousin. But I called around to people that I know that were not attending when I left. And I called and said, hey, I said, how you doing? He said, I'm all right. I said, so what do you do on Saturday? And I'm just home, not doing anything. I ain't, I said, well, I'm opening up a church. You can come. And then when I called somebody, what you doing on Saturday? Yeah, I'm going, to church, whatever. I said, all right, then bye. I didn't even tell them I was opening up a church because I didn't want to pull anybody from any, I wanted people that were not going to church anymore, that had kind of like given up, and let them know, listen, there's something new that's happening. Maybe you can get your, be rejuvenated, get your joy back or whatever, and try a new environment or whatever. But some people do pull people with them, which, is, I say it's wrong, whatever. But
just for clarification, there's a big difference. Like poaching is different than people following you. People will follow you when you leave the church.
Right.
You can't do nothing about that.
Right.
People will follow you. I'm talking more so that people.
But people telling people, come on.
Yeah.
Underhanded stuff.
That's what I'm saying. Like that stuff to me is wrong. But if you are someone who is a light, people follow the light.
Right.
It's just natural. Like so if you are somebody who's charismatic and people love when you used to preach,
absolutely,
and your energy and your spirit, yeah, when you leave and start something, they are going to follow. That's what's going to happen. My overall point is more so kind of just, I don't know, it just feels like churches are dividing themselves in general into these really small, numbers. And I do think overall, generally speaking, I think it kind of takes away some of the power that we can have because we divide ourselves versus when we come together, you're just much more powerful. You have more resources. You have more money. You can do more things.
It
And so,
can, it can, but the other flip side of that is it. Let's use, for instance, a mega church that has um, 3,000 people,
okay,
right? There are people in there that if they weren't in that mega church, they would be doing something in a smaller church. So some people, believe it or not, they don't want the mega church, even though they can do more, whatever. They don't want that environment. They don't want to feel lost in the crowd. Chances are, if you go to a mega church, you don't know the pastor.
nope.
Okay, unless you're in that inner circle, you ain't got the pastor's number, right? And rightfully so, because you cannot pastor thousands of people. You
No.
have to have sub pastors.
Yeah.
You have to have sub pastors. But you didn't join the church for that sub pastor or for that lesser pastor. You joined because, like TD Jakes, people didn't join the Potter's House because of Sharon Williams. They don't know Sharon Williams.
I have no idea who that is.
Okay, I don't know who it is either. But I'm just saying that may be one of his pastors or whatever.
Okay.
They joined because of TD Jakes. TD Jakes is not coming to your grandmother's funeral. TD Jakes is not marrying you. TD Jakes is probably not visiting you in the hospital or whatever because he's too busy being TD Jakes. But they have somebody else, Mark Johnson, who's going to come, and you may be assigned to him as whatever. But you didn't join but some people like that ministry. As for me, everybody in my church got my cell number. Somebody just texted me just while we was on, talking today, talking about they tested positive. Okay, from the wedding. It just was last Sunday, not this Sunday past, last Sunday before. So they have my number. When things happen, I have one of my members called me in the morning and said she's going to check on her mom. She doesn't know, she hasn't heard from her mom in a couple of days. She's going to check on her. And I said, okay. And when I called her back, she said she's waiting for the coroner. I said, the coroner?
Oh,
I said, your
wow.
mother dead? She's like, yeah. I got dressed, I got in the car, and I went straight to the house. So you have a big church, who you going to call? You might not be able to call the pastor. So some people like that, and some people don't mind. So
I agree with you. Okay, so maybe my problem is kind of the extremes. So because everything you said logically makes sense to me, and I've never played for a big church. I don't really like big churches. Bigger church I went to was the church I grew up in, and it was maybe I don't know, like maybe 200, 300 people. But most of the churches that I've attended recently have been 50 to 90 people. Right. My thing though is under 50. To me, you're in the red. Under 50, have you been inside so many churches lately? I've been inside of them. You go inside of a church, it's like two to a pew. Before COVID now. This ain't social distancing.
I've been to some empty churches, and I've been to some packed churches. I've been to all kind of churches.
Yeah. To the church that there's no way you could be a pastor of a dying church and not know you guys are dying. Members are the lifeline of a church. So when you have this thing where you go from like 100 a week to 50, and then next thing you know, you're getting 20 to 25 a week, and there are a bunch of churches out there in New York City like that. And that's what I'm saying. They find themselves ended up getting like evicted because they can't pay, the mortgage or whatever for the churches. And so they'll go to church one week and the doors are shut down by the city. You knew you were headed down this path in the first place, right? In my church, we say the church covenant, right? Having been led to lead you guys, right? We do a church covenant when we do communion, right? And in the church covenant, it says, moreover, we pledge that if we are to be removed from this place, we as soon as possible unite with some other church where we can carry out, right? It's in the covenant.
Okay.
You should unite with another church when you can, and you're dying. My question to you is, how come that ain't happening?
I don't know.
That's what I'm
I mean,
saying.
dying. Some, uh, well, some people they're just. If you believe you've been, a lot of people believe they've been called by God to do something, and a lot of times people think that things will turn around. They think it's just, some people think that it's just temporary, and they think that, and then if you're meeting all your bills and stuff like that, then I mean, hey, and some churches are, with very low membership, but they meeting their bills.
Okay.
But I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I agree, because even, I have to take, and, if if I told the church this before, I said, I don't know how long I'm going to be doing this. I don't know if it's 5 years, if it's 10 years, if it's 20 years, but I know as of right now, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Mm.
Okay. And some people, they think, I'm not thinking that way. I'm thinking it's either pastoring
They think
on,
what? You kind of cut off. Can you repeat that? You said
some
some
people
people
think
think.
that pastoring is pastoring until they die.
Got you.
They die in the position. A lot of times that is one of the issues as well. Um, After you have served for a set time, you're getting a little too old. It's time to move on. It's time to get out of the seat. you know, uh, some people don't agree with that, but it's time to let somebody else, kind of take the ministry to the next level. But it is ego, why people won't let things, go. You see it's dying. You have no children here. You have no young people. If you have no young people, then it's definitely on its way out of here, because who's going to be the next generation to take over?
And that is the case for a lot of churches. Like I said, the church that I was at before I'm at now, my uncle's church. One of the issues there was we had, the elder statesmen, that crowd. We had some young people, not a lot, but some young people. But what we were missing were kind of that late 20s, uh, early 40s crowd. And those are the crowd that usually, get married and have children, which then, becomes the next generation of the church. And so if your church is missing that block, I mean, your church is kind of on life support within like the next 50, 60 years. So
Mm-hmm.
you have churches now that they're missing that block, and they're also missing just the regular, young people. There are no people under the age of 18 in their churches, none at all. And so to me, I'm like, we have to make a move here. Maybe the move is not to join another church, but I feel like churches don't feel like they should approach these problems logically, and I think that's a mistake. The Bible does not support the absence of logic. I think that's one of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest misconceptions about believers, is that somehow, uh, uh, if you believe in God, you are illogical.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane to me. There were a bunch of planning in the Bible. The Bible's, maybe 70% of the Bible is about money. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it is a very logistical book, but some churches don't seem to approach certain problems like, attendance with like a logical solution. They just kind of think, to your point, I'm chosen by God, so eventually it'll come around. And that makes me, no, sorry.
Again, when we go back to what we talked about earlier, as far as seminary and going to school and learning some of these things, hopefully you might learn this in school. You learn ministry and how to, conduct ministry in church. You learn strategies. Learn other strategies. You only are a product of your environment. So if you're not exposed to certain things as far as ministry, you don't know. Unfortunately, I wasn't exposed to a lot of reach ministry coming up in the church that, my father pastored, and churches prior to that. So that's not something that I really know much about. It's something that I would have to learn. I would have to intentionally learn it myself. Connect with another ministry that does that. So I'm a product of my environment. And a lot of times these pastors that don't know better, they're products of their environment, because their pastors didn't know better.
Mm.
They just stayed, and the people were faithful. So they just assume that people are going to be the same with them. Unfortunately, it's a different, like you said, it's a different generation of people.